this video, Dr. Jordan Peterson explains how males and females choose their partners.
But in human beings, you see sexual dimorphism. Men are slightly bigger than women. And that's also generally characteristic of creatures that have a dominance hierarchy that's tilted towards masculine. And then the other factor seems to be that human beings have, their infants, our infants, have very, 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 very long periods of dependence. And it's very difficult to maneuver your way doing anything, really, especially anything that has to do with competition and power, if you're taking care of, one infant, let alone three. And so it seems to me that those are all valid reasons why the primary power structures among human beings have typically been male and why they're represented as masculine. Now, I think there are other reasons too, because this is a multifaceted phenomenon. I mean, one of the things that's very interesting about human females is that they're selective maters. Now, chimp females are not selective maters, and what that means is that the dominant males still have most of the offspring, but the reason for that, apparently, is because they chase the subordinate males away from sexually receptive females. Although the sexually receptive females will sneak off behind a rock somewhere and mate with a subordinate male. But as long as the dominant male is around, the probability of that is quite low, so that the female chimps aren't sexually selective. Whereas human females have concealed ovulation so that no one knows when they're at their most fertile, and they're selective maters. And women in every society virtually that's ever been studied have a typical pattern of behavior, which is that if you look at the female dominance hierarchy and you look at the male dominance hierarchy, the females will mate across and up dominance hierarchies, and the males will mate across and down, which works fine for both genders because their interests align. But it also means that, in all likelihood, that women have exerted tremendous sexual selection pressure on men. And that might be part of the reason, of the many reasons that we actually, the theory is that the common ancestor between chimps and humans was a lot more like a modern chimp, than like a modern human. So for whatever reason, we've undergone a lot more transformation in the last 7 million years than chimps have. And one possible reason for that, and I think it's a highly probable reason, is that sexual selection operated a lot more viciously, so to speak, among humans. It's operated to the point where you have twice as many female ancestors as male. And you might think, well, that can't be possible, but here's how it's possible. It's like only every second man had a child. Well, all women had one. Now, of course, that isn't what happened. But on average, that's what happened. So the proportion of men who are completely childless in any given generation is far higher than the proportion of women who are. So you see an element of expendability in males, and that's typical across the biological community because you don't need as many males as you need females in order to keep the population moving forward. And one of the things that happens as a consequence of that, at least in principle, is that males are more behaviorally variable and variable across a lot of dimensions than females are, and that's a plus because they're more variable on the upside, but it's also a negative because they're more prevalent on the downside. So now there's substantial argument about that in relationship to people, what the actual implications are of that for human beings. One potential implication is that although women and men have equivalent IQs, the standard deviation is slightly different, which means that there are more males who are intellectually impaired, but there are also more males who are 4 and 5 standard deviations above the population mean. You don't need much of a difference in standard deviation in order to produce radical differences at the extreme. So, for example, I'll give you an example. Males are more aggressive than females among humans, but the effect is only about half a standard deviation. And so what that means is that if you take two females, a female and a male, randomly from a population, and you were trying to guess who was the more aggressive of the two, most of the time, about 60% of the time, the male would be more aggressive than the female, but 40% of the time it would be reversed. So, that's a lot of overlap. But then here's the rub. So let's say, just for example, that among the population of men and women combined, only the most aggressive person out of 100 ends up in jail. Those are all men. Because that tilt towards aggression is enough so that if you go way out on the distribution, the only people who are that extreme are men, even though the population difference isn't that great. So anyways, there's a massive debate in the relevant literature about the potential consequences of that for things like cognitive function, because there's some indication as well that men are more cognitively specialized, but women are more cognitively robust. And so, anyways, it doesn't really matter. But what does matter is the fact of this permanent dominance hierarchy. Now, the dominance hierarchy also has another, the male dominance hierarchy also has another feature. So we already said that, you know, on average, men are half as likely to leave offspring as women are. And so what that means is that all things considered, this isn't, I'm not trying to make this into a circular argument, because I could say it's the more successful males that leave offspring, but then you'd say, well, that's a definition, Darwinian definition of success, but I don't mean Darwinian success, because that's self-evident. What I mean is that if you look in the modern world, for example, and you try to predict number of available sexual partners for a given male, your best predictive measure of that is income. And the best predictive measure of that is intelligence and conscientiousness.